What if a scientist discovered the root cause of humanity's problems, humanity's division and conflict, but no one listened and virtually no one knew who he was? While a PhD student in the early 1940s, this scientist's research was taken away from him by the US government, classified, and was used to help build the atomic bomb. In 1951, the scientist wrote the textbook on quantum theory. 1 year later, he would produce a more coherent interpretation of the theory, and later he would go on to lay down a new foundation to revolutionize science with a new fundamental order underlying it.
What I want to emphasize is that each part of the hologram in principle contains information about the whole object, whereas with a photograph made by a lens, you aim for having each part of the photograph giving information only about a corresponding part of the object, right? So the lens is really a device that analyzes. The holograph does not analyze, right? It contains the information about the whole. Now, my suggestion was, and then suppose we remove the photograph and go back to the interference pattern. That is a movement. So that movement contains information about the whole object, movement of waves. And if we're in this room, all the waves coming to the eyeball, to the retina of the eye, to the pupil of the eye contain information about the room. They unfold onto the retina, and then from there somehow back into the brain, and you get consciousness of the room, right? The same may be true of the whole universe when you look at night in the sky, or with a telescope. So the idea is that everything is constantly unfolded and unfolding in a dynamic process. Now, my suggestion was that quantum theory could be understood, its mathematics and so on, if you said the basic reality was to be thought of, called the essence for this purpose, was to be thought of as a movement of folding and unfolding, and that the things that appear to us are the result of that, right? Now, therefore, the electron is constantly folding and unfolding. You see the part, everything, and the now that means you have a kind of wholeness, because the whole universe is present in everything, but not present not only passively but actively.
Now, actively, where does the pattern come from? The pattern comes from the molecules back.
No, it comes from the unknown. It's the whole universe. I say there's the whole movement. See, in this view, we say the atoms are appearances, just as physics is saying anyway. Ultimately, this too might be an appearance, but we say at each stage we're accepting something as the essence to explain the rest. It's a way of thought that we have adopted.
Sadly, the scientist would be exiled from the United States for exploring non-approved political views. He would first go to Brazil, and then Israel, and finally end up in the United Kingdom, where he spent the rest of his life. He would spend 4 decades working on his interpretation of quantum theory and his theory of the implicate order, but arguably his most important work was understanding the root cause of the crises that face humanity, and this was the most urgent and important part of the legacy he left for us. The Dalai Lama called him his science guru. Einstein said he had the greatest confidence in him as a man and as a scientist. This is the tragic story of David Bohm.
Intriguio.
Bohm may be the only scientist who has uncovered why human culture is so consistently incoherent.
Yes, well, these meetings have been concerned with really the question of thought, or really and the way what it's been doing in the world, right? And just by way of a review, we all know that the world is in a difficult situation and has been basically for a long time. That now we have many crises, in addition to the latest one in the Middle East, which has no clear solution. We have also the ecological crisis, which has gone on the back burner, I think, and we have economic crises developing, and we have the fact that there's nationalism all over, and people seem to have all sorts of hatreds, and we have religious hatred and inability of people to get together to face the common problems, such as the ecological one or the economic one. Everything is interdependent, and yet the more interdependent we get, it seems the more we split up into little groups that don't like each other and are inclined to fight each other and kill each other, or at least not to cooperate. And so one begins to wonder whether it will be possible, what is going to happen to the human race. Technology keeps on advancing with greater and greater power, either for good or for destruction. And yet, it seems that it tends to be used more and more. There's always this danger of destruction. We no sooner had this rivalry between America and the West and the East, or sort of dissolved away, and then we have this problem. The Middle East pops up, and doubtless another one will pop up later, and so on. It's sort of endemic. It's not just something that occasionally happens. And it's in the whole situation. Now, I think we're all familiar with that situation, and if you think of technology advancing, you have nuclear bombs, which will perhaps soon be available to people like Saddam or to somebody else if he goes, and you have biological weapons and chemical weapons and what other kinds of weapons they haven't yet invented, but surely will. And then you have that the faster either we go into a depression, which will help save the ecology, or we go into a boom, which will make us happy, but it will ruin the ecology. I mean, the faster we go into prosperity, the faster we create all those other problems. So it seems whichever way you turn, it doesn't work. And why not? You see, is there any way out? You see, can you imagine in 100 years of this, or 200 or 500, it won't lead to some gigantic catastrophe, either to the ecology or in some other way? And perhaps war, who knows? Now, so it seems that people have been dealing with this piecemeal, looking at symptoms, right? Saying we've got to solve this problem or that problem or that problem, but there's something deeper which is constantly generating these problems which people haven't been considering. Right? The way I used to have the analogy that there's a stream and people are pouring pollution upstream and they're trying to remove it downstream. But as they remove it, they may add some more of a different kind. So what is the source of all this trouble, you see? Now that is really what we've been concerned with in all these dialogues of the past few years. And we're coming back to the source is basically in thought, I'm saying. And those of you who come will have heard this once or twice or more before. Which many people would think is crazy. You see, the thought is the one thing we have to solve our problems, right? That's part of our tradition. And see, it looks as if the thing we use to solve our problems is the source of our problems. It's like going to the doctor and he'll make you ill. In fact, in 20% of the cases, apparently, we do have that going on. But in the case of thought, it's far over 20%. They say that so the reason why we don't see the source of our problems is that the means by which we try to solve them are the source. So but that may seem strange to somebody who's first heard it, because our whole culture prides itself on thought as its highest achievement. And it's the achievements of thought, I'm not trying to say, are negligible. They are very great achievements in technology and various other ways, and culture. But there's another side to it which is leading to our destruction that we have to look at.
Bohm followed the truth wherever it took him. No one had a greater influence on Bohm than the philosopher and spiritual figure Jiddu Krishnamurti. It was Krishnamurti who said that thought will not solve humanity's problems, and the two men were in dialogue with each other for decades.
I've been a close friend of Krishnamurti for many years now. And really the first thing that drew me to him was
on reading his book, First and Last Freedom, where I encountered the phrase, "the observer is the observed." Now this struck me very strongly because in physics, in my work in physics and quantum theory, a very similar notion arises where we see that there's no separation between the observing instrument and what is observed. So I read the book further. I kept on reading it with fascination and read whatever else I could get of his. And then eventually I met him in 1961. There, I felt that we had an instant rapport. And from then on, I met as often as he could, and I would go to Switzerland where he was giving talks. And there he began to organize his schools, the first of which was this one here at Brockwood Park. And I participated in that work and helping and I kept on coming to the school to help out where I could. Now, these schools were essentially aimed at a different kind of education, international schools. With an attempt was made to treat the pupil individually, and to not to have competition, but to foster creativity, and to really the Krishnamurti's teachings would be at the base of it. Now, it was here that we also had these dialogues which are going to follow. And the subject of the dialogues was really the future of humanity. Now, this is something which we're all concerned with now. Even then it was visible that the human race is facing a crisis, a very severe crisis, in which its very existence may be threatened. And we felt that what Krishnamurti had to say was really played through an important light on this crisis. So this really concerns two essential points. One, that thought, of which we're often the most proud of, we consider the highest achievement of the human race, is also at the same time the biggest danger when it is not carried out properly. And Krishnamurti has gone into this extensively, and really I've gone into it since that time. I've been going into it much of the time. And also the second point, that we have a wrong attitude to time, especially what he calls psychological time in which we try to change ourselves.
So here we had a brilliant physicist who turned his attention to diverting humanity from the crash course that it's on. He found his way to the real cause of humanity's problems, and he dedicated the rest of his life to bringing attention to these facts. Let us not let David Bohm's legacy be forgotten.